Did you know teachers aren't humans? They're not allowed to show stress or age, have health problems, show fear, waste time, and most of all, fail. They're not even allowed to go to the bathroom. That's okay, because we're here to talk about how we're all just playing a role. And at 3 o'clock, we get to be us again. 40 years ago, two 8-year-old boys were bored out of their minds in school, and they vowed one day they would do something about it. They did it to honor their friends. They did it to honor their classmates. They did it for the love of learning. I'm Matt, and this is Rob, and 40 years later, we get our turn, but now we're playing teacher.
I started recording.
Okay, welcome to Playing Teacher. I am Matt.
And I'm Rob.
Over here. Yeah, and we're on. So I had just had a very interesting afternoon. I just came from the emergency room with my dog.
Mhm.
And she's fine. She's fine. Her name's Abby. She's 10 and a half, and it's not an emergency, but she had a UTI, and the vet's not there for a couple of days, when it's over the holiday. So I had to make a decision. Do I want to let her bleed for 3 days? Of course not. I love my dog. So I took her to emergency and I got her the antibiotic that she needs, and I'll take her back to her regular vet this week. She has her yearly anyway coming up. But while we're there, a cat dies, and a cat dies like the most dramatic way. Every vet like ran to the middle, and I'm on the side with my dog Abby, and Abby's sort of like laying around. She's bored, she's whining, and then there's like a Dalmatian in like a cage who I sort of like befriended because he's like, please open the door. I've been here all day. I don't know what the Dalmatian story is, but I was like, I can't do anything for you. So, but I'm here and my dog's here, so we're all hanging out over here. But the Dalmatian sits up and Abby sits up, and we're watching the cat, like they're giving like compressions and everything. And then this is like 10 minutes, and then the cat dies. And then they put the thing over the cat. So that was what I just, and here we are playing teacher, talking about education.
Wait, I've got a question. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm trying to imagine what the scene is
Wait,
like.
I can't see you. There's like oh, I gotta hit okay. Oh, now I'm sorry. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I had okay over your face. So I didn't see you the whole time when I told that story.
I so I'm just trying to
I'm not,
picture. I'm
yeah,
trying to picture this. So like, but I'm
yeah,
picturing like a waiting room, and all of this is going down like in a waiting room. Like,
yeah.
how is it that like this was visible to everyone? You know what I mean? Like,
This was all right. So picture this is in the middle where they go when there's an emergency, and then everybody else who is there for not really the emergency, but your vet's closed or could
oh,
be an emergency. You're sort of on the sides,
you've been
right?
taken back already. Like
Yeah,
you're
I'm on
okay,
the
okay.
side, and
Yes.
then they're coming in and out. Then they have to just
Yeah.
get, they're figuring out what, especially mine's a senior dog, so they're figuring out like what what medication she's on. She has
Mhm.
arthritis. She has a bunch of things. And I explain her history with UTIs. She had a kidney stone pass, but she's still on the same sort of diet,
Yep.
UTI diet the last 6 months that helped the kidney stone pass.
Okay.
And then so there's a lot of information back and
Hmm.
forth. So then I never saw, you know, I only went to emergency like two other times. I never saw a real emergency happen, like what would actually happen. And I don't know what happened to the cat before because you don't, you're not going to go quiz a bunch of vets in the middle. But they all ran over. Everybody was like all hands on deck, and
Hey, what
everybody. It's kind of
happened?
like right, and it's kind of like if something happened to a student, God forbid, you know what I mean? Like everybody would just get
Yeah,
involved,
yeah.
and and I've been in those situations where I would say like everybody. Mine was like a kid shit his pants and puked at the same time in the bathroom, but that was the emergency. And I
Wait
had to
though,
tell what?
were you one of the code red responders in school?
I used to be. I
Yeah,
was. I was
yeah.
at one. This is not that.
No, no,
I'm
I know. I'm
saying,
saying, yeah,
no,
yeah.
yes, no, I've been in those situations where everybody runs and you feel like the asshole if you didn't get there first, right?
Well, like just for context, like a code red responder. So there's a small group of
They
people,
train you,
maybe
yes.
10 of us, who are trained with the defibrillator, right? The machine that's
I'm not trying to say it, but go ahead. Yes, yeah. If
so
you can't say it, no, you're my guy to say that word. So, you know,
so we're all trained. We're trained in CPR, right?
Herbie could say it.
But
Fibrillator. That's not it. No,
But
no.
then but then like out of the blue,
Right.
just like a fire drill, they'll sound like a certain alarm, and everyone on
Yeah.
that team, it'll say like code red, and then it will say a room like a 314. So
Hmm.
everyone on that team has to basically sprint, no matter what you're doing,
Right.
to room 314. And like you just said, if you're the last one there, you feel like
It doesn't make really sense now that I think about it, just for the fact that I don't remember what happens if you have a class.
you just
Do
leave.
you leave your
I think
class?
so, or maybe you have to.
I don't even remember
I don't know
because I
actually.
haven't been on it for a few years, so I don't
No, I guess you
remember.
don't leave, but maybe I don't know. Maybe you have to like ask a
Say,
neighbor or I don't
cover
know.
somebody because you have to jet down there. It's an
Yeah.
emergency. I don't remember the actual protocol for that.
Maybe no,
It's
maybe
been a
it's just
few.
whoever can come has to run. That's why there's like 10 of us.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
But yeah, they train you at school for CPR. I believe still, I was trained like most of my life since I'm like 15 because with CPR because
You were a lifeguard, no?
yeah, I was a lifeguard, so
Okay.
they trained me for that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, the kid having shitting his pants and puking at the same time is a whole other emergency. You know, that was everybody face forward, and then you have the kid has to stay in the bathroom, and then you call for help actually, because this is an emergency. This is first grade actually. That's a different kind of emergency because if you ever had any kind of thing like this happen to you, this gets traumatized in there. You have to
Oh
have the
yeah.
kids stay in there, and you have to call for help, and then nobody came. And like, and I kept calling and calling and calling, and then they wanted to send the oldest, and God bless her. I love her to death, but they sent like the 75-year-old para they were told me they were gonna send up to me to help. And I said to them, I was like, I don't think you realize this is, you really have to come up here right away.
Yeah.
He's really, um alone in the bathroom and scared, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And like, and I keep telling him, do not come out. Because if he comes out, because every time that door opens, the kids are going to throw up from the smell and everything. So this is how bad it is. Within like, like 10 minutes, there's a principal up there. There's three custodians. They're like, oh my God, they're in the bathroom and everything. My job is basically to keep everybody looking at me. And then the kids obviously want to make fun of the kid because they're in first grade. And my goal is like everybody look at me the whole time, and I'm keeping them interested. Nobody turn that way. I was like, this could happen to anybody, doing one of those. But that's a
You're
school
like, this just
emergency.
happened to me yesterday.
Like, yes, this is. I was like, you could be you tomorrow.
It happened to
You're, you're
me
pull,
last
you're
night.
pulling it. Yeah, you're pulling everything out that you could think of to be as real as you can in these
This
things.
happened to my
Yeah.
college roommate every other weekend.
Yes, yes. You're gonna find out in college.
Wait, I got a question. Were you ever there were certain situations where my room would be called for me to come and like
When I shit in my pants? No,
no,
no.
no, no. Well, yeah, that, but no,
No.
there would be certain situations with kids where I'd be called to come and help, like not an emergency like this, but like something that I don't know, for some reason people thought that I would be able to help with, and no one else could help with it. Like, was there ever anything like that for you? Like where you were,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah. Cockroaches.
yeah.
I
Mine.
was called to
Let's go. Let's
kill.
take turns. Let's take turns. So cockroaches for you.
Uh,
On mine for my first one is bed bugs. If there was,
no, I never.
yeah, no, if there
I
was a bed bug,
never.
yeah,
No, they never called me for a bed bug. The lizards, we both were called for
yeah.
because we were both responsible for. We had a hole in our terrarium,
Yeah. And like
and
12 lizards escaped. And
yes, I don't think we fixed that. We tried to fix the hole, but do you remember when speaking of that, you're in the middle of, what I always feel is the most stressful situation, one of the most stressful situations about the job is the post observation or the observations. You're in a post observation with an administrator sitting in the lab, right? And a lizard, I'm in the back room, right, of where the lab is, and I'm just having a sandwich, relaxing, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
prep or lunch or whatever, and a lizard, I just happened to pop open the door and I was like, "Ooh, hey, Rob's getting, his post-op, and there's like a lizard walking, like slowly sort of by you guys like this. Now, the administrator keeps going on and on about your performance and everything and reading it to you and has the papers out and it's like, and then you did this and then you did this and then you did that and the back up and then you make eye contact, you notice it, and then I sort of have the door open, you make eye contact with me, and then I'm like, you're looking at me and I'm like, and I'm pointing and you're pointing and then you sort of see it, but the administrator is still reading your observation very seriously. And we're like, and I'm like, because we don't want the lizard to jump on the administrator in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of what you're doing, and
Or
we don't
even
want
to,
to,
or even to get
we don't
away.
want to
Like
get in trouble.
finding these things was like, in the whole
Right,
school. It was, yeah.
right, and I don't want to ruin your post-op or anything. Like everything was great except for the lizard jumping on your my head. So so I point to you, so you calmly just get up and sort of like and you don't even like make too much of a move. You sort of just get it to like fall on your hand and you sort of just bring it slowly, and she keeps talking, and like about what you did during the lesson, and I'm watching this and I'm staying still. I'm like just watching it as like you can get it back. I think I opened the door or I helped you a little bit very slowly. And then and nobody knows anything that's going on. And you just got it back in. And then you just sat back and kept going. And I was like, all right, let me just go back inside here. We escaped that and we moved on. So lizard helping, that was one of them.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
let me go back to the bed bug for a second, because just for context, like if there was a bed bug sighting or incident, you have to capture it. Like you can kill it, but you can't, like, it's a weird thing. It's like you have to
you
capture
were
it.
the guy for bed bugs, really?
Yeah. So you
Like
have
they
to,
wouldn't call custodians for that?
well, no, I would go down. I would capture, like put it, like find it, capture it, put it into a baggie, and then you can't like crush it. You have to send it, like the custodian or someone has to send it somewhere
Right.
so it can be confirmed, like, so I
That
did
it's
that.
right.
Yeah.
You find it, you put it in a bag, a Ziploc bag,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Yes, I remember the Ziploc bag bed bugs, and then you
Um,
have to confirm that it is a bed bug.
yeah.
Yes, I do.
My
I,
next one, my favorite one was,
who decides if it is?
I don't know. I want to meet that person. I want
Yes,
to,
like
yeah.
that's your. I feel like it has to be
I mean,
like the
I
custodian.
knew when it was or wasn't, but I don't know who the official, like, czar of bed bugs is in the
The
DOE.
school aides had an interesting job. Some of them had the job of doing lice
Yeah,
checks,
lice, right.
but then but they were like the lice masters,
Yeah, yeah,
and they would even check teachers. Like, you want to get checked? I'm like, sure, and they're like, and I always had short hair or whatever, so
yeah,
they checked me. I was like, but they would be the ones that are looking for a certain thing, for lice in your hair. They would check everybody. It was a whole thing. If one kid has it in the class, then the whole class has to go downstairs, make a line and wait, and they all have to, and then they're all like,
yeah.
then if the gossip started, who got it and everything.
My
And of course, yeah.
my favorite one is there would be kids. This happened more than once, maybe three times. There would be and these are separate incidents, different years. Kids will be walking up the stairs, and younger ones. And I don't know if you remember this, but the banister is about 3 inches away from the wall, So kids would
Uh-huh.
stick their arm as they're walking up, down
Oh, to
like
get it
this into the
stuck.
banister. And then
Yeah.
once they did that though, if they turned their arm, they couldn't get it out. Like it's like
Hmm.
so, and so I was called literally out of class to come. Like, we don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how this happened. It's almost like Houdini. Like the kid's arm is stuck in the banister. Like, well, if it went in, it had to. But the whole class has now been standing there for like 10 minutes. So I
So
remember
what do you,
going, yeah, it's like, and then I
and
have to,
you're talking him through it, right? Yeah.
well,
Okay.
it's like first you got to push the arm down, then you got to turn the arm, and then you got to do this, and like I got it out in maybe like 5 seconds, but I just feel like the whole class starts clapping, it's like, you're a wizard, Harry.
Well, I did not have that happen, but this is like an odd thing that just had. I would have a habit of just breaking things at school, right? So like So I would be. It wasn't like I was called. I would turn myself in.
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
I'm 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 honest
The
to a fault.
opposite.
Right. Like, I would actually say what I would break. I just didn't care. Like I didn't want it on my conscience,
Causing a call to
No,
have to be made.
no, Jewish guilt in, Department of Education is horrible. So what I would do is I would like go into, so there's several holes around the school that I made. And one of them is in the wall by the piano. And like so I was the piano guy, not Billy Joel, but I was okay. So they would call me down and play for graduation, whenever. So I would always turn the piano where I think it should go,
Yeah.
depending on, slightly. So it had, it has wheels and
It's a
everything,
grand piano, by the way.
grand piano. So, this was no, but I was probably the only one who moved it ever. But when I moved it one time, I smashed it, kind of just like smashed or bumped into the wall, but the wall, I don't know, it's like a very loose wood.
Hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? It was like, like the kind of wood you break in when you're in Taekwondo.
They're
It
like
just seemed like it was easy to break.
it was like
So,
plywood. Yeah, yeah.
right, yeah. And so it broke right through a nice big hole. Now, what I did was I'm staring at it for a little while. I'm like, this is a really big hole. So I cover it up with me. I sort of position my body there because I don't want all the attention on this huge hole,
Yeah.
and then, but later I go and turn myself in. I'm like, hey, just so you know, I, and there's no way to say it. So I always would say there's this large hole, um, in the auditorium, and I did it, and then it would just be quiet. It would always be so awkward, and then like, oh, okay, well, no, I took the piano and I was trying to move it and I smashed it into the wall. Sorry. And that was like,
They want,
okay, but I'll try not to do that again.
I want to know
But
what they're
no one would
picturing.
really, no, until at that point in my career, no one really would get mad when I did
No.
these
It's
things.
like the
Like,
Shawshank Redemption. It's like this
right. Because I was
giant
being
tunnel.
so, because I would totally right. I would take total, like, blame for it. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't mad. If you just take mad, people aren't going to get mad at you, at least at that point in my career. If you're just very honest, like, yes, I did this. You're right.
Yep.
I broke that, wall. But it did smart. I don't know where it came from, but maybe from the street or something. But there started to become like an odor of pot that would come through there. So
Well, it
I
was
would be
by,
sitting.
you know what? The alley was there. Remember that alley?
I know.
That
But
that
I had
alley
then
is
the
like,
hole over
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'd be sitting there for like an hour and a half during graduation, with like an odor coming. Every once in a while I would, call a teacher over. I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, hey, they're like, what? I'm like, come by the piano for a minute. And they're like, they'd come by like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah, that all the whole, like, not the whole time, but like, yeah, but they might want to fix this. It's still there, the hole. And I just left. So,
I mean, our posters are still on the wall from 10 years ago.
right.
So,
So I don't, holes aren't a priority.
no.
I broke a
No
hole.
one's even taking a poster down. So,
No. Yeah. Yeah. The posters are staying up there
so
where
I've
they
got
were.
something. I drove from New York to North Carolina today, so like 8 hour drive. I'm thinking about a lot of stuff. So I thought about a topic, something something that I want to, it's a kind of a question I'll pose to you, and then I'll let you kind of run with it for today.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is so let me set it up first, and then I'll tell you when I'm ready for you to jump on it, you know?
Okay.
So this is about like expertise, right? The idea of expertise, like someone being an expert in something. Okay. And so there's all different definitions of this and different perspectives about what it means to be an expert in something. And, I feel like I remember there was one, well, many people in the school community will kind of like incorrectly cite research about this stuff. I remember one person in particular would be like, you need 10,000 hours of practice to be an expert in something. You know what I mean? Like, and it was like, that's kind of like a, eh, maybe like a weak representation of some research that came out and said something like that, right? Because we both know that, yeah.
Unless you're a prodigy, you know.
Well, yeah, well, no, I'm saying, but you can have
Mm.
someone who does something for 100,000 hours and they still suck. You know what I mean? They're still
Right,
not an expert, right? So,
right,
or you can have someone who, yeah. So that, I mean, it's not a rule, but I remember this person thinking that it was like a rule because they had read
right.
it,
That
you know.
they read it,
So,
and that's the number, the
but so no,
10,000 hours.
I've always had this question. So when you think about the school structure, right? You have
Yeah,
the principals, you have the APs, the custodians, but I want to think about the hierarchy, right? So the
yeah,
administrators, right? And so you went to admin school, right? Like you went through a
yeah,
program? Okay.
yeah. I
So
went through a program.
what is it that you're learning when you're there?
Everything that they do on the job. So you have like a class on law. You have a
Yep.
class on
Budgeting and stuff like that?
budgeting,
Yep.
you know, yeah, you know.
Maybe leadership or something?
The first class also, they had everybody get up and almost like an acting exercise, and just they want to just hear your leadership voice also. You know, we got into that, you know. There's a lot of papers, you know, um, uh, and it kind of just weeds people out. And then you hear from also a lot of different people that have done the job for years that come in and they try to scare you a little bit and they persuade you from almost doing the job because I love professional wrestling, right?
Hmm.
And in professional wrestling, I'm going to compare it to that. Because I know like when you first break into professional wrestling from not being in, you know, professional wrestling, but I know that especially from a long time ago, they have these people come in and they see who wants to come back the next week, you know? Like, so they sort of like they might break your leg, you know, and see if you come back like 2 months
Yeah.
later, or
Hmm.
they call it stretch you, you know, they put you in a lot of different holes and everything. They run, you know, and you see who's puking, you know, they see who comes back tomorrow, and then you know, and it's sometimes it's a surprise who comes back. So, out of the group that I was in, I think only three became out of like 15, three became APs. I didn't for a number of
Hmm.
reasons.
Yep.
You know, I finished. I got to the end, but I knew that I didn't want to be an AP probably about halfway, 3/4 in. And I just kind of then, I'll just finish my internship because I had this woman come to the school and everything, but I already knew that it wasn't my passion. And if it's not your passion, um, you should not do it. But
But you can
a
still
lot of
get
people do it for, go
your
ahead.
salary differential, right? You can still get your
Right. And a lot of
master's
people will do
plus
it for that.
30, right?
Yeah, I think I didn't need it for that long to get my 30 above because
Yeah.
I lost that wasn't the best investment of my life. So I
Hmm.
lost some money, you know, sticking with it. But at that point I figured I just would follow through to the end. I also didn't want to at that point look um in a different light to the people that I was working with as far as administrators because they knew that I was doing the internship.
Yep.
Yes.
But now there's this weird thing, right? So I get that now you've had training and maybe some practice in um, managing the building, right? So managing all of that legal stuff and managing, talking to the custodians and ordering and budgeting, and that's a huge
Yeah.
job, right? Massive.
Everything that I hated.
Right. And but then there's another part of the job that I just don't see where the qualification comes in, and that is the observing of teachers, right? Because becoming an
Well,
administrator doesn't mean that you were ever an expert teacher. It doesn't, you may have only taught a year or two, right? And so, so now if you let's just say that you went through the program, you became an admin and you were my admin, right?
yeah,
You would have to observe me teaching science. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, and so you get where I'm going with this, right? It's kind of like I feel like it should be something that's removed from the administrator's plate, and there should be like another,
I was actually talking about this with my wife before,
yeah,
and
another
because I
branch
remember
of admin that deals
no, but
with,
I
yeah.
mentioned that you mentioned this before that you actually said that the only person who should um, observe an expert teacher is another expert teacher.
Hmm. Yeah, I
And
get if someone's
and
like a
I thought,
first year
now
teacher,
from somebody who's been teaching 18 years straight, right? I get that
Hmm.
because there's nothing harder or more stressful. And for young teachers, if you're listening to this just coming in, and experienced teachers can appreciate this, there's nothing worse when after a month or so, you get your meeting, and then you find out how you're going to be observed that year based on the year you had before. And if you're effective, you're going to get two observations. And if basically mostly everyone's effective. So you get to choose basically if you want to have I don't remember if I'm getting this, slightly wrong, I'm sorry, I apologize. But if it's it's either like one formal and then one informal. Most people do the two informals, which means 15 minutes. They can show up anytime they want, to your classroom. Now they
Hmm.
can come more, right? But those are two informal. Here's the problem with that. Average class is anywhere from like 45 minutes to an hour, right? Let's say it's 50 minutes. Um, they can come at the end,
Hmm. Yeah,
right? When you're cleaning up,
right.
right? And
Missing the whole activity, right?
let me just say, okay, that I was in an experience. I know where you're going with this, right?
Yeah.
I was in an experience with an administrator where I was observed,
Yes.
and then for a couple of years, and then I was tasked with a very, very difficult challenge.
Yeah.
And this challenge was, hey, let's switch roles because sometimes I think your ideas are too abstract, and I think that I want to show you kind of how to really master science. Now,
Wait,
and
that's
I'm not saying,
it wasn't clear. I'm gonna rephrase sometimes because like I don't know if that was clear. I know the story, but I want to make sure that anyone listening understands the context here, right? So
sure.
I'm gonna say it and you tell me if I'm correct or you correct
So
me.
you're the brains and I'm the brawn, is what you're
No.
saying, basically.
So you're at this point
You're
you're
going to translate my Brooklyn accent.
at this point you were a science
Hey,
teacher.
yo, Rob. Yeah, I was teaching science. Yeah.
Now, were you K to two only, or was this one of the years where they split us like down the middle and had like each of us teaching K
I
to
don't know for
five?
sure, but I was teaching. This is a first grade class, I
Okay,
could
so
tell you.
let's just say this was during the K to two years. So you're a science
Probably.
teacher.
Yep.
A person comes in. We both knew who that is. Comes in, observes
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And then the feedback that this person gives you is like you said, they want to. And you're right. This is unheard of, right? I wish
I listen,
yeah,
and I never got unsatisfactory,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
from this person. But
This should happen all the time, by
this
the way.
person, here's the thing about getting observed, right? All right, time is one of the biggest things for a teacher, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
a
Yes.
valuable
Yes.
commodity as a teacher, right? You get a prep and a lunch, right? A lot of times, you're so stressed out, you just might need 20 minutes to just sit there and like just stare into space,
Hmm.
whatever it is, there's things you have to do. You got to put things away, you
Yep.
know what I mean? Like, you're recharging your batteries, prep's not just even though they says, you're preparing basically for the next class, a lot is happening on a prep, like,
Hmm. Yeah.
you might have to make a phone call. There's so many things that's going on. So basically though, if you have an observation, you get then after right after, that comes about a month or so later, right? You get called into an office and they're going to go over with you, right? And you get your feedback. Now, if you're lucky, this could be 5 minutes. This could be no meeting at all. They could just give you a piece of paper and ask you to sign it. And here, can you answer this question for me, which has happened? Or they can there with you your whole entire prep and read it to you word for word
Hmm.
and then go over it with you. And this is what was happening to me at this
Hmm.
point in my career.
Yes.
So I was in this point
Hmm.
and then 5 seconds later, you have to run and go teach a class after your brain, is spinning. So I was told by quite a few people that I was sort of getting a hard time by this administrator, right? And for whatever reason, and almost wanted to show me the expertise of science and take my teaching to another level.
Show you how it's
Now,
done.
what's that?
Show you how it's done.
Yeah, show me how it's done. So the way that this administrator went about this was to say, well, let's switch roles, and then you observe me, and then you write me up.
Yeah. Teaching a science
I,
lesson.
teaching a science lesson. So, of course, I'm the yes man. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say no, but I did. So did have some questions. So, um, who's going to see this? And she's like, well, it's the same thing that happens, so you're going to give it in, and it's going to be seen. And this is a formal, it's going to be a formal document, and you write it up, and you write if it's satisfactory, and you write what I need improvement on, and that's the way they did it back then. This was before Charlotte Danielson came in, right? So basically, you're basically just watching somebody teach, and then you're giving commendations and recommendations, right?
Yep.
Um, Now back then, after I was working with this administrator, I would get like one commendation be like this big, and the recommendations would be like this big. But I would still get a satisfactory at the end, but I would have to sit through it. So, as far as I knew, from being with the children and at this point already for a year or two, I felt like I'm definitely not anywhere close to being a master. I'm not at your level, but I had engagement down. And I was reading and studying science all the time. That's the way I was. I was not, I did teach science before, but I was in no way a master, and I had a lot to learn. So I was studying my ass off, really, so that where I would get to the point where if any student asked me a question, I can talk about the philosophy behind it, or at least spin it around where that student was thinking about it. And I didn't mind, having them think in an abstract way. So I believe at that point, one of the times which we really got into a long disagreement was about a clock that was in back, and I was explaining the Earth that way, and this administrator just thought this is way too abstract. That was one of the things. But I thought, what's wrong with abstract? They're thinking. They're you know what I mean? So I'm like, isn't that what we want? And a lot of thoughts were coming out. They're discovering things. Anyway, so a little while later, I have to then go at this point, and observe this teacher. And this is what happened. So I
Observe
had the
the
play,
you said teacher, but you were observing an administrator who's playing teacher.
but I wrote it as teacher on
No,
my
no, no,
report.
yes, I know. I want to make
Yeah,
sure
no,
because
no, yes.
yeah.
No, 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 to be clear, yeah. But I wrote teacher and
Yep.
teaching on
Yep.
my report,
Yeah.
because I didn't write him. I wasn't going to write administrator.
No. Right.
At this point, this is not an administrator.
Right.
This is a teacher. I'm
Right.
observing another teacher according,
Yeah.
Dear blank, blank, blank. On this date, I had the pleasure of watching you model a lesson. At 11:54, you walked into room 214 and said, "Good morning." You then briefly went over some of the rules you have for class today, with the most important one being that students should not call out. You informed the class you would need a few minutes to set up as you were placing several charts up. Now I'm going to pause for a second. Okay. Class started at 11:50, so 4 minutes late. All right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if we are 30 seconds late to a class, do you know what happens? There's a phone call over the loudspeaker, which has happened for years. Where are you? If you were in the bathroom for an extra minute, that's a whole other podcast. My mother,
Mr.
God bless
Jacobs,
her.
please report to room 313.
Yes, yeah, and my mother, God bless her soul, and she taught me years ago when I told her I was going to become a teacher. She said to me, and my mother was very blunt, and sorry if this grosses anybody out, but I'm just going to say it. You're going to experience the half of shit. I think every teacher right now knows what the half of shit is, and I'm not going to explain any details. All right, but there's nothing worth with experiencing the half of shit having the announcements go off. Okay. So if you're 30 seconds late, you get that. So
Oh man.
this is now we're already not on an even playing field. 4 minutes, right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
I'm in the room. Now I can entertain, but I don't. So this is first grade, right?
Yes.
Middle of the day, right? So obviously they're going to be crawling around a little bit, things like that. The teacher is not in the room. The teacher leaves because that would be my time, right?
Yeah.
And I would be there then with the class. And I'm sort of saying, hey, we're having somebody come in today, and they're going to teach you. Well, what are you doing back here, with the clipboard? And I was like, well, I'm going to be here just watching, and I'm keeping it light, whatever.
Hmm.
So this is what happens after that, after the 4 minutes, right?
Learning how to
So
do my job.
yes. So you inform the class. Yes, I'm learning how to be better at this. Why continue crawling around? You do what you're doing. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now, which is nothing right now. So you inform the class you would need a few minutes to set up as you were placing several charts up. So, all right, I got to stop again. A few minutes to place several charts up.
After
Now,
coming late.
after coming four
Yeah.
minutes late.
Okay.
Now, if I knew I was going to, this is where preparation comes in and experience. Now, this is supposed to be an expert, right?
Yes. Well,
Right?
I
Because
mean,
that's,
yeah, you're,
yeah.
this is the
So
model.
you placed a pair of fake eyes in the back of your head as you continue to set up. That's cute. Okay. That's cute. Nothing wrong with that. That we would call that the hook. All right. You got some there. Afterwards, you ask the students why you did this. One student answered, so you could see in the back of your head. Another answered, so you can see if we are behaving badly. At 12 o'clock, you ask them, can I really see you with these eyes? Thumbs up if I can really see you. Thumbs down if I can't. Most students said you couldn't. You then told the students you were trying to fool them, and then followed with, some animals do that. You told them that a bird's feathers might look like eyes to another animal. They fool the other animals. You then said, today we are going to talk and look at pictures that show us adaptations, and at the end of this lesson, you are going to make animals that have adaptations. The students then applauded.
You got through it.
Yeah. No. We're just getting started. Now, I just want to be clear about something. All right. If I walked into that room
Yes.
and said, today, right?
Hmm.
Today, we're going to make Play-Doh. They would stand up and cheer,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So like anything you said at this point, if you just said today they're going to applaud. But good for her. That's when that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
You then okay. Now you then went over. Now by the way, they're still sitting here, and it's about 10, 15 minutes already. Okay, so they're starting to crawl around. This is what I'm not writing in there. They're starting to get restless. Now I'm in the back, and all I'm doing is I'm not helping. I'm just writing down because that's what they do. They don't talk to us when they come in. They just sit in the back and they write. And that's the pressure that teachers do feel. So I
Hmm.
have to give the same experience back. I have to just write down what happened. You then went over the meaning of several vocabulary words you would be using in the lesson. These were on a chart written out already. The words were adaptations, environment, habitat, physical trait, characteristics, survive, and camouflage. Now keep in mind, these kids are 5 years old. Okay. Want to
No,
explain that.
they're second grade, right?
No, they're in first grade,
Oh,
5 and
first
6
grade.
years old.
Okay.
Yeah. 4 and 5 in kindergarten, 5 and 6 in first grade. They're so they're 5 and 6 years old. Okay. And I'm just gonna say these words again. Okay. All right. Um, adaptations, environment, habitat, physical trait, characteristics, survive, camouflage. All right. At 12:08, this is about 15 minutes now in. You started showing some examples from books. Okay. You showed a bear's claws, a woodpecker's beak, a kangaroo's pouch, and a turtle shell. You then had the students turn and talk to each other about what they had just seen, before quickly calling them back and re-instructing them on what to talk about. The students went back to talking. You then asked the partner of the student to share what the other person said. By 12:18, you put up a chart that read, adaptation, and the other side read helps to. You told the students we would not have time for this chart. At 12:20, you began to give instructions for an activity to draw a make-believe animal. Now, I have to stop just on the time, okay?
Yes. Okay.
Class starts 11:50. It's now a half hour in, okay? 12:20, right? Doing the
Okay.
math there? Yes,
Yeah.
that's a half hour in. The class is only 50 minutes, 20 minutes left, right?
Yes. Yes.
They haven't got up. They're in first grade right now,
Yeah.
okay?
They're still
You
sitting
just
there listening to the
they're
person
well,
talking.
no, they're not all sitting. You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like they're like on each other. I'm not writing any of that stuff down.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like it's like I'm just watching. And what am I supposed to say? Edgar just pulled on Henry's head. I'm not going. They would. They would.
yeah. No, I
During
know.
the class, Shirley poked the nose of Tim. You said, please don't do that. And Tim was very upset with the finger in his nose. But that would actually be in your report.
Yeah.
Please, when someone puts someone's finger in their nose, address it in the proper mat. That would not.
Right, right, right.
I'm not going there. I have enough to deal with this. So I'm. By the way, I'm told to write down everything that happens, right? Because that's what they do. So
Yes.
everything I'm writing down, except for that kind of stuff, unless it's really, really obvious. So at 12:25. Oh wait, no, and I skipped over from 12:20. So you began to give instructions for an activity to draw a make-believe animal and re-instruct in what an adaptation is. You gave some examples. If it's dark, they need big eyes. If they need fur if it's cold. They need claws to catch food. If it's dark, they need big eyes. Oh, and I said that. Okay. They need claws to catch food. At 12:25, you called for helpers and gave very detailed instructions how you wanted the materials given out. The students followed very well. See, I'm being positive.
Mm-hmm.
12:28, the
Yeah.
students were at their tables. You instructed them that they would have 5 minutes to work together to create an animal. At 12:33, you were circulating around the class checking in with the groups. All right. At 12:40, you asked the class to stop. Now I have to stop here. So for a half an hour, they were sitting there giving information about vocabulary words.
Mm-hmm.
At the tables, when they actually worked, at 12:33, you were circulating around the class. They just got back to their tables at 12:28, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you sit back down at your table after if you're 5 years old or 6 years old, and you're just sitting on the rug for half an hour, right? Are you fully engaged the moment you sit back at your table? You probably need about 30 seconds to a minute to sort of like kind of get yourself together, okay, I'm back in my chair. And basically then, according to this, at 12:33, and I was very accurate with this, 12:33, you were circulating around the class, checking in with the groups. So you're checking in. At 12:40, that's 7 minutes after that, you asked the class to stop. So basically, from you gave them a half an hour with the information that you gave them, and you gave them more or less 12 minutes to create these animals. You asked the class to stop. You asked about 10 students to go to the meeting area. The rest remained at their seats. You then called the rest over. Not a bad management technique, No, they each shared, and you asked them questions about their animals' adaptations. During the share, you asked the student, how does the adaptation help their animal? The student didn't answer, and you helped the student by answering for her. At 12:50, you did a group assessment by saying, thumbs up if you can think of one adaptation. Most students put up their thumbs. That's where it ended. Expert.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was probably like drinking out of a fire hose. You were learning so much that
No, but here's
you
where it
couldn't
gets
even
even.
process what you had experienced.
No, so I'm jotting all this down, but I also have the teacher coming in because this went over, right? At
Over
twelve fifty,
over the time.
yeah, 10 minutes over the time.
Ooh.
This was supposed to be over at 12:40,
But
right?
and just
11, the classes are an hour, it's like 50 minutes. So
but just to
11:50 was supposed to start.
for
At 12:50, the crappy group assessment with the thumbs up started already. So
Oh, okay.
the teacher was already back in. So the teacher walked in, because teachers are very accurate, right? So 12:40, you asked the class to stop, right? That's when the teacher came back, right? And you asked about when they started coming over. So the teacher is then like sort of like a little bit confused. I don't know if the teacher really understood what was happening. Like, why is,
Yeah,
like,
right, right,
did I
right.
screw up? What's happening? This wasn't really like a known thing.
No.
I mean, like that was going on, and it was never really done in before. So as to my knowledge, it wasn't. So they're coming over, and the kids are starting to get like a little kooky, and they're crawling over each other and things like that. And so the teacher sort of like leaned into me, like what the hell is this? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, should I help? I'm like, don't, no, don't step in. Like, well, it's my time now. It's like, no, 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 no,
Let
no. I
let the
have to write.
master work.
Let this is I'm being taught right now. Don't help. So I was like, so teacher's looking at me and I'm like, come on, like I gotta take notes here. Let me concentrate.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so now I'm tasked with a few things, right? I have to write this masterpiece up.
Yeah.
And how now this bombed. Okay. This bombed for a lot of reasons because number one, time, like 30, 35 minutes. They're all just sitting there crawling around. You know what I mean? The
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary words are way over their head. Never heard these words before. There's a million things. So I had two different versions of my report. Now I showed it to my wife, and one was a little bit more, I don't know what the right word is. You could say hostile, and she said, "Do not hand this in. Do
Yeah.
not." I was like, "But that's what happened." She's like, "No, no, 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 no. That's where like that's where like Edgar's poking Charlie in the head,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
put everything in." She's like, "Do not, do not." I was like, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Yeah, but see, if I don't, she's like, so then I did another version where it's more like this, streamline. Now I'm used to one little commendation and then so I didn't even do that. I was kind. I gave four commendations and two recommendations. You
Mm-hmm.
know, do you want to hear them? You want to move on?
No, no, I'm
You want to hear my commendations? All
yes.
right. All right. But I got to tell you the best part of this though, um, you know, I made copies of this and then I decided to put it in every administrator's box. And then I wrote a separate report, basically giving a reflection, which I wasn't asked to do, on the observation, more or less outlining why you shouldn't teach science like this.
Yeah.
And then that one
Yeah.
also in everyone's box. And then I had to get written up on what I did
Mm-hmm.
by the administrator based on that work. And, I was rated satisfactory. And I was very, very accurate on everything. And this administrator, though, the one thing that she critiqued on me when I was doing this was that I didn't comment on the chart with vocabulary words. All
Oh.
right. It was even said that I did not mention the chart with vocabulary words.
So
It's
critiquing
actually,
your critique.
yes, it was said very clearly because I could tell when I had to meet with this administrator, and I made copies and everything, like, they were, I was
Mm-hmm.
going to get a lot of, this is going to backfire on me as far as the heat I was going to get after this. But I just said, you know what? I have to be honest about it. And I didn't correct this, but, you know how charts are to administrator. It's like gold. You know what I mean? They,
Mm-hmm.
they love visual charts. So of course, I would like to make this is, I would like to make notes of aspects of my lesson you did not mention. I provided students with vocabulary written on a chart with pictures to support their understanding of the words and the concept to be taught. So,
In your face.
yeah, that's right, except my commendations, if you read it, number 4, you are well prepared with materials for the class. The books you used provided background information, and the charts were used to aid the students as they were learning new vocabulary words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
So I think that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that. But anyway, so I had to then decide because I caught it. Do I write up that because that was the main thing. I was like, no, let's leave it in.
Yeah.
But if I left it in, it's like saying you didn't read what I wrote because
Yeah.
I wrote that as a combination. But I didn't. Not to be mean. It's almost just like I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I was like, yeah,
Yeah. There's only so
I
much.
want, yeah. All right, here's my accommodations. Okay, you provided the students with an engaging activity. Bullshit. No, it was horrible. It was so boring. But so yeah, I'm lying. Which they lie to us all the time. Okay, the student enjoyed the creative process of designing their own animal and figuring out what kind of adaptation to give it. Not really. Providing students with an active engagement supports the lesson and inspires inquisitiveness towards more learning. Okay, all right. You gave clear and detailed instruction when giving and collecting materials. I agree with that. And describing the tasks. Focused student behavior allows more time for students to pay attention to the lesson and learn more readily. Now, I want you to keep this in mind. I'm writing this. I am not an expert teacher, according to this person. And if I'm getting this type of review, I am as close to a beginning teacher, and if I'm asked to do this, I am as close to a beginning teacher from this administrator's point of view as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
So it also provides a risk-free environment as students know exactly when to get out of their seat and when not to. Clear expectations provide guidelines for the task completion and ultimate understanding. Yeah, I guess you could say I sound like a beginner. I don't want to be arrogant about it, but number three, you had a clearer teaching point based on Bloom's taxonomy. This provided structure for the lesson and higher order thinking skills. And of course, you were well prepared for the materials for the class. And of course, I talked about the chart. Now, here's the recommendations. Here's the fun part. Like I said, I told my wife I had two versions of this. One, I wouldn't be at there for much longer. So I was kind, you could say. But these were the recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
There were two. During the observation, the students spent a total of 45 minutes on the rug. Now, just keep this in mind. The class is only 50 minutes. Okay. Including the share,
Yes.
leaving very little time for discovery activity time. According to the New York State scope and sequence, science process should be based on a series of discoveries. For younger students, the emphasis on discovery. Although the information you gave them is valuable, it should have come after the students had a chance to discover more on their own or in small groups about adaptations. Science is an ongoing process, and having more time to base the learning on discovery might help the children retain the information. I would suggest cut the meeting time in half, introduce the concept, and plan an activity that could have the child discovering more about adaptations on their own or in small groups, rather than give them all the information beforehand. Make this a 2 to 4 lesson activity. That was number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, during the share, one student was a bit confused and either didn't understand your question and didn't remember what her animal's adaptation was. So you answered for her, explaining it to the class. Drawing a conclusion is a very important part of the scientific method. Rephrasing the question to help the students verbalize their conclusions or asking other students to possibly help explain it would be a better approach than just answering for them right away. Students tend to learn more effectively when they have a central role in the scientific method. But I'm a beginner, so what the
Yeah,
fuck do I know, right?
clearly. I
I
mean,
just started, yeah. No, the best is my last sentence. It was a pleasure watching you model this lesson. This lesson was rated satisfactory.
yeah, yeah.
You know, but yeah, there's a separate report then that I wrote. So, I mean, I could read it, but
Wait,
it's up
is
to you.
is the separate one the more hostile one?
No, 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 you don't understand. So I was asked to just do this.
Yeah.
I took it upon myself based on this. I gave it no, the hostile one, like that. I don't know where that is. That
Oh,
was
oh,
that was
that's too
that.
bad.
No, I gave a separate report basically saying why we shouldn't fucking teach science
Yeah.
the way
Oh,
you're
okay.
fucking
Okay.
teaching
Yes. Yes.
science.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I wasn't asked to do that.
Yep.
I just gave it in. That's why I was told like I went above and beyond,
That was a
and why it was
gift.
never done again.
You
Because
did.
this was my way of saying, I thought to myself, you know what? let me show you what I've been reading and studying for the last 2 years, and
Yeah.
then you tell me if you want to walk into my class. I basically said this why this could have been so much better. I mean, I've been reading for a while. I don't have to read. I mean, I can read this another time, but and I reflected what I was feeling being put into this role. And if you choose to do this again, what other teachers I talked about the pressures that they would feel and why it can be positive or negative. You know, I just was it was very honest report, that I just wrote reflection on my observation, but um I just, I guess like the last chapter is over the next several weeks I will be introducing the FOSS kits as well as some other interactive tools and together with Mr. Monahan, we're going to attempt to incorporate the difference between where a school is going with science instruction and where it has been with your shitty class.
Mm-hmm.
But but there's a lot in here,
That's
just
fantastic. I want to actually go back to
yeah.
the wrap up for this topic, right? So I guess we can agree that the admin line, maybe it would be better if it was branched, right? So like in every school, you could have someone who's in charge of all the administrative duties that have to do with legal and budget and all of the things that an administrator is trained in, right? But
Mhm.
then you would have another administrator with equal power, you know what I mean? But who is only there for the instruction, if that makes sense. And I know that someone might say, "Oh, but we have coaches for that, or we have this for that." But no, it's that's not good enough. Like,
But
you
with this person,
this person would have to be an expert master teacher, and but it won't even be a full solution because you won't be able to find someone who is an expert in all things. I mean, another option might just be like at the district
that
level.
that that, that would be hard though. Tell you why, a lot of administrators, you know what? After 5 years, like how many years does it take to become an expert teacher? A lot of them, they don't, after a few years, they're just in there. So that's eliminating probably a large amount of people that it takes to really master the art of teaching. Like, do you consider yourself like a master? First of all, it's an ongoing process, but it does take many, many years to get to that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, with that, this fits with what I'm saying. So here, let me give you an
No, but I'm
example.
saying, does it though? Because you're
Yes,
saying that the teacher would be the master, right?
yes.
But how many years at this point have with that? So you're not saying an administrator, you're saying a teacher in the school then would be an
No,
assigned teacher in the school. You're saying an administrator would be the
you're
one.
see, this is the problem. When you hear the word administrator, you automatically think of what that means now. I'm saying you have to
Yeah.
redefine what it means. I'm saying you have to
So then
it
teach me. What
yeah,
does it
yeah,
mean?
yeah. So you have two types of administrators, right? And it doesn't mean so, the main administrator in the building, that you need that critical person to deal with the building issues, right? The
Yeah.
custodian, but when it comes to the instruction, right? Doing the observations, for example, right? All like these types of things, maybe even like choosing the curriculum or maybe even like deciding on the PDs for the teachers, right? You need someone who's an expert teacher. So I'll use
And a background on every subject that they're going to observe.
right. So that's where it gets
And
tricky, right? So you're not
yeah,
going to find someone who's an expert in every subject. So, but
but they can read about it. They can study
well,
about
I,
it.
I wouldn't, yeah, but I wouldn't do that though. Just consider this though. And this used to kind of exist, not really, but there was a version of this a long time ago in the district where I started. So imagine that someone like me, imagine that there's a position that opens up in each district, right? And a district
Yeah.
has a certain number of schools in it. And so in that district, there's a position for an administrator who doesn't reside in one building, but who travels around to all of the buildings in that district throughout the year, right? And that person is for one subject area. So for example, I would apply for that job to be the science administrator for district X, right? And so my job then would be, and me myself, as a person who's been teaching for this long, who, is an expert teacher and who kind of like wants to wants to now do something that's along the same lines of what I'm doing, which is teaching the next, you know, generation of teachers how to teach science or STEM or whatever. But so I would go around to all these different schools, right? During the week I'd have a schedule. And so I would literally be going in and observing their science teacher and giving feedback. And then working with that person to come up with the types of PD that they find valuable, working with them to see like what kinds of things do we need to get you for a curriculum, right? So it's totally removing that part of the job from the
That other administrator who's just focused on either the
yep,
law, the budget, or what's going on in the school.
right.
Yeah.
Have one for math, have
Yeah.
one for reading, whatever. You could have, you know, you have one for theater and art. There's, I mean, for any subject that you think is important, which is really all of them, you should have one person in that role for the district. So it's not like adding, if there are 25 schools in the district, you're not adding 25 new administrators. You're just adding, one per subject who's going to cycle around. Because you were right. They're only coming in what, twice a year, if that, to observe you.
Half hour
So,
the whole year,
I mean,
unless you really bombed the year before, and then maybe like an extra, period or something like that,
yeah.
But most
But
people usually on the effective level,
but me as that science person, I could go in, I could probably visit every school, every elementary school in a district, well, once a month. You know what I mean? Like it would be a real hands-on, like teacher to, I'm saying teacher to teacher, but I don't, maybe you don't call that person an admin. Maybe you call, but they're on the administrative level though.
I think they're
They're not
looking at
under the, they're not under the principal of a school.
I agree with you that these people would be an excellent idea. The way it is right now, I think they're looking at the wrong things when they walk into the
Of
room.
course. Oh my God.
I mean,
It
I
would be
can
like
walk
me,
into.
it would be like me sitting Steven Spielberg down and critiquing, his directing ability. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because I've seen a million movies, I'm not
Now,
qualified to do that.
no, but like, all right, so I'm a writer, right?
Yeah.
I do a lot of observing in my own time, like, so that can carry over to, like, if I was an administrator and I'm walking into the room, and I was trained to be administrator, right? There's a lot of things you can tell, you know, like almost in 5 minutes from what they want you to see, you know. Basically, I can walk into a room and in about 10 seconds, just the way the teacher's talking to you, and see if they create an environment of respect and rapport.
Yeah, sure.
You feel it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You feel it by the way the teacher talks to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you feel it, the comfort level. You know what I mean? You feel how they almost greet you when you walk in, you know. Um, uh, engaging students in learning. Is there a spark in there?
Yep.
You could find that out in 5 seconds. And of course, like you could just look around and take it in. There's so many different ways that you can look at this, and of course, using questioning discussion techniques, we're getting a little bit more technical, but designing coherent instruction, that's argumentative, on how you do
Mm-hmm.
that, and if it's effective, and there's a whole rubric for that as well. But there's managing student behavior. you know, the kids are going to hopefully, you know, be on their best behavior when the administrator walks in, right? But how you respond to in that, kids know you're automatically changing like that, so they know. Some of the teachers, if they're lucky enough, they got tipped off. This goes on all the time, and they got a heads up that
Yeah.
they might be coming to you. They came by me.
They're walking
Teachers are
around.
always looking. They're walking around. Oh yeah, oh, yeah. They're walking around. They're walking around, and then you start to do the math in your head. You're like, wait, they didn't get me second, like third, and then how many people? I always poke out in the hallway, why am I poking my head out? Just saying, like, were they near? They didn't come the first
It's just
10.
distracting. It's
It
unnecessary.
it makes you, but no, but it makes you a worse teacher.
Right? That's
This whole
yes, that's what I'm
pro
saying.
and
It's yeah.
I do my I once I after I get observed, my best teaching is always after that's over. because I'm so much more relaxed. Or even the time when I realize they're not coming in, and I can just be myself. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
basically, managing student behavior though is interesting during an observation because the kids are different, right? They're automatically different. They can be worse or they can be better.
I've seen this a million times. In a lot of places, if an administrator walks into the room, like everything stops. The kids sometimes they stand up, they say, and then all together in unison, it's like, "Good morning, Mr. Blah blah or Mrs. Blah blah or good morning, Doctor Blah blah." You know what I mean? Like it's just like
Well, I'll throw it back to the administrator sometimes. Everybody, let's greet,
mhm.
so and so. You know what I mean? Just to say, and then sometimes it's a way just to say, like, hey, remember what we were just doing for 15 minutes?
The entire way that this is done is wrong. Like so
Yes,
there
it
shouldn't
is.
be there shouldn't be this episodic thing where the person comes in and it's like a formal observation and this is what I saw and like and these are the check marks that I wanted to see and I didn't see them or I did see like the entire it's as wrong as the way that we assess kids normally. Giving a kid a summative test like which is like a standardized test in say anything science for example that's based on all this content, right? Like how much do you remember? Like how much can you regurgitate, right? It's
Hmm.
like we're just looking at the wrong thing, right? So and we're doing it in the wrong way. So it's like we're assessing kids on the wrong thing in the wrong way at the wrong time, right? For the wrong reasons, right? So everything is wrong about it. But instead if we like and this is going
But
back
the
to
kids have somewhat of a knowledge even when these tests are going to be.
sure.
We have no idea of knowing. We know it's in a 3 or 4 month span, and it could be at any time of the day. If you're a cluster teacher, right, you have 5 to 6 different grades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have 5 periods a day and 50-minute periods. This could be any time of the day of 5 different periods, 5 different times, that it could happen. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then if we're talking about like, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for you? This is what your whole job, this half hour is how you're looked at then the whole year. So
Yeah.
if you bomb a 15-minute lesson for the next 4 or 5 months, you're looked at least I believe that's how you're perceived as a failure
Well, it
at
is.
your
It
job.
is.
And and then because that's how you feel inside. Even, like, because that you have a piece of paper then that says, well, you suck. And you got to walk around knowing that. But then you got to greet your kids every morning and be positive and everything. But inside though, everyone then that's higher above you has a piece of paper that says, "Well, you could do all that stuff.
Yeah.
You suck. Oh, you helped me with that today. Thank you, but I know you suck."
Yeah. Well, I mean, we
You're
agree
getting a
that the
salary, but we think maybe
yeah.
maybe in a few months you won't suck, but then you'll kind of still do okay, and
Yeah.
maybe next year. That's what it means, really,
Yeah.
deep down. I'm exaggerating for a reason
No, I
because
know.
I'm saying that's the mental stress that teachers go through then when they wake up and they think. If they
Sure.
fail at that observation, I'm saying fail, right? Pete, they'll say it's a work in
I f-
progress, always you're developing. But look at the vocabulary words that they use to define this.
yeah.
You're either highly effective, you're developing, or you're ineffective.
Yeah.
You're telling me if you get ineffective or developing after you've been teaching for 10 or 15 years and paid for loans and master's degrees, and then somebody who's been out of the classroom for 10, 15 years walks in and says, by the way, you're just developing right now in this, and you feel like, and that's what you have. So hopefully in 4 months you can get to this level. You telling me you're going to feel really great coming to work every day, seeing that person? No,
Yeah.
no, that
I
does a
mean,
number on you. It does a
yeah,
number up
like so
here.
just
It does a number
back
here.
to back to the point. The entire way that it's done is incorrect. You know what I mean? There's a much better way to do it. And, I mean, we could probably have a whole multiple episodes on what that is. But I mean, to start with, I think we addressed a big part of the problem, which is giving a tremendous amount of power to one person or a small group of people, whether or not they're qualified to do all of the things that they're tasked with doing. And it's not their fault. Like that's the way the system works, right?
Yes, Rob, go
I'm
ahead.
just thinking of the people who are only listening and who can't see what you're doing. which is most of the people who have no idea what or who Herbie is, and they just hear this voice.
Herbie has been just, if we're still rolling in this wherever this is, Herbie's been, my partner in my classroom. So yeah, Herbie's like my Mr. Hat if you watch South Park. Herbie's been with me, but I'm not Mr. Garrison. But Herbie's been with me for 18 to 20 years, and that's why he looks like this. I tell students he's a ninja. That's why he has this,
What
tape.
you haven't described Herbie? Like, what is Herbie?
I'm a chicken. I'm a 5-year-old chicken, and I'm a master in karate. Yeah. See? See? See?